Welcome to part 5 of the introduction to Field of Glory Napoleonic. In this episode we'll talk about all things buildings, buildings being a big feature of Napoleonic battles. They have some pretty special rules. Let's start with movement into and out of buildings. So in the diagram here you can see there are two units, but actually a building in FOG Napoleonic can only ever have one unit in it, so this is just showing the same unit at different stages, and I'll explain that a bit further. So to enter a building, in this example A is not touching the building, so cannot enter, whereas B is in partial frontal contact with the building, or in contact with the building with some of its bases, so could move in to the building with its next move, but only to occupying. Occupying is where you're not defending the building, you are merely, it's a way of coming in or out. So as you can see there, C is how you represent occupying. With its next move it could move to defending with a complex move test, or it could exit the building from this occupying position without any CMT. D is positioned around the perimeter, so it could be clustered like in the picture, or you could split the bases all around. And to have got into this position it would have had to have passed that complex move test, and if it wanted to exit it would have to actually change back out of defending using passing a CMT to do so, back to occupying. And then let's look at how units exit the building. So here E and F have legally exited the building, and how do we know it's legal? Well, part of the building is directly behind all of their bases, and as much of their rear edge is touching the building based on the chosen direction of exit. So the key thing to see here is units in the building can jump out in any direction they like, so long as they've got the full the building behind all their bases. So you can actually exit on an angle if you want to come out at that corner. However, G here, that's an illegal exit because the building isn't directly behind all the bases, and in this example H has come out on the side, but again it's illegal because if they're coming out on the side they should be lined up with all their bases, they're touching the building at the back. So that's also an illegal exit. So firing, there's firing in the movement phase and firing in the assault phase. Let's talk firing in the movement phase. Again here the two units in the building representing the same unit either occupying or defending. So what do we have? C cannot fire at all because troops occupying a building cannot fire even if they are assaulted. 1 who's outside the building cannot fire at C because infantry cannot fire at enemy who are only occupying a building. But 1 could fire at D, so remember D is defending. The building is in A's arc of fire and so is a legitimate target. However, because E is also in the arc of fire, E being outside the building, 1 would have to split the 4 dice that they have for this shot between D and E as per the normal allocation of fire rules, which we'll cover in the next episode. Down on the bottom right there we've got some heavy artillery. So number 4 can fire at C or D, even though C is only occupying. Artillery can actually fire at units who are occupying or defending a building. And then let's talk about D. So D is the unit defending the building. So the defender can fire at 1 or 2, or 1 and 2 should I say, as they are within range and can fire at the building. So D, the rule is that the defending unit can fire at every unit that's in range and can fire at the building. So you could theoretically have 20 units that D could fire at if all 20 were in range and able to fire at the building. D can also fire at 5, and this is because 5 is within close range of the building. Even though 5 cannot fire out at the building, any unit that's comes within close range becomes a legitimate target of units defending the building, so it stops units sliding past the building so easily. However, if D can't fire at 3 because 3 can't fire at the building and is not in close range. It would be slightly different if there were no other targets for D to fire at. So if 1 and 2 weren't there, and 5 wasn't there, then D could pick one single target in range and in arc. And then finally, down in the bottom right, D cannot fire at 4, the artillery unit, because it is beyond the range of the building. The building only fires, troops in a building can only fire out at 6 MU, and so even though the artillery can fire at the building can't fire back because it's out of range. Firing to and from buildings is relatively ineffective, so at medium range they're hitting on 6s, the troops firing into the building, and likewise the units in the building he's shooting out hit on 6s as well at that range. But at close range, you can see their unit 5 will get hit on 5s, so it becomes a little bit more powerful. And then artillery normally would hit on 6s as well, but heavy artillery hit on 5s. And then finally, defensive fire in combat. So here we've got 3 units that have assaulted the building, and 2 separate situations. Assaults when the building is only occupied. So here you can see that 1, 2 and 3 have assaulted unit C, who's occupying the building. C in this case gets no defensive fire because occupiers don't get defensive fire. C has a total of 4 combat dice that it has to split across 1, 2 and 3, because units in a building only get 4 combat dice. Whereas 1, 2 and 3 each get 4 combat dice. So there'll be 12 dice being used against C, and C's only putting 4 dice back out. Everyone hits on 5s though for building combats, so it's a little bit harder than combat in the open, which we'll talk about later, where people hit on 4s generally. And then combat resolution occurs as if in open terrain again, which we'll talk about later in the series, but basically it's easier to eject a unit that's only occupying. So if C is forced to make an outcome move, so to retire in some way, it'll leave the building on the side furthest from the assaulters. So in this case it'll need to bisect the angle of the 3 units. You can see it there, so they'll come out on the top right. And if this happens, then 1, 2 or 3 will then follow up into the building to occupy it, and that'll be up to the player to choose which unit goes in. But again, only to occupy, they can't move straight to defend. So that's when the building's only occupied. What about when the building is defended? So this is now unit D is having a fight. So 1, 2 and 3 have assaulted. D gets now 4 dice of defensive fire against each of 1, 2 and 3, hitting on 5s. So 12 dice in total, so has a good chance to at least make the 1, 2 or 3 test to close, or even push them back. If they all do close and stay fighting, then D will get 4 combat dice against each of them. So again, you can see the defending unit is a lot more powerful than an occupying unit. But similarly, 1, 2 and 3 will get 4 combat dice each against D, so D will take quite a few hits as well. And again, everyone's hitting on 5s. And D, in this case, they will only make an outcome move if it routes. So you'll remember that the occupying unit would have to make an outcome move if it lost the fight, even if it was only disordered and that the enemy was steady. But in the case of a defending unit, it will only leave if it routes. And so if D doesn't rout, then 1, 2 and 3 themselves will have to make outcome moves unless they are steady, in which case they will remain in contact and the fight would continue in the next turn. So they either bounce off if they don't rout the defending unit, or if their morale is lower, or they will stay in contact. Finally, outcome moves. So you need to retire in some way and you meet a building. What happens? So here's A, it needs to make an outcome move and the move will reach the building. So there are two options or 2 situations. So if the building's empty and A's move gets halfway in, then A will occupy the building as part of its outcome move. Alternatively, if the building's empty and A's move doesn't get halfway in, or if the building is occupied by a friendly or enemy unit, on reaching the building in either of those situations, A will wheel by the minimum to avoid the building and complete the move. So he gets to A2 position and then wheels and ends up at A3 to complete its move. So that's it for buildings. Hopefully that's nice and clear. In the next episode we will talk about firing and the firing phase.